Why do the men who seem least interested in commitment become the most captivating force in a woman's inner world? And what did Jung discover about the shadow side of masculine energy that redefines everything you thought you knew about attraction and desire? The answer lies not in manipulation or toxic behavior, but in the deepest layers of the unconscious mind, where ancestral patterns still dance, where your nervous system speaks a language older than words, and where the integration of shadow and light becomes the true path to authentic love and spiritual evolution. Before we dive deeper into this exploration, I want to invite you to join our growing community right here on this channel. If you've ever felt torn between your spiritual aspirations and your deepest desires, if you've questioned whether sexuality and spirituality could coexist, or if you're seeking a framework to understand the patterns repeating in your love life, this is exactly where you belong. Subscribe now to unlock access to our complete series on Jungian psychology and conscious sexuality, where each week we release new insights that build upon each other, creating a progressive pathway toward profound self-knowledge. Check our pinned comment and description for the full playlist and weekly progression guide. This journey of understanding is transformative, and it's designed specifically for those ready to integrate all parts of themselves. Now back to what we were exploring: the magnetic pull of emotional unavailability and the psychological mechanisms that make indifference feel like love. Here's what Carl Jung understood that most modern psychology glosses over with clinical detachment. Within every human being exists a shadow self, those parts of our personality that society deemed unacceptable, that parents deemed too aggressive, or too sexual, or too ambitious, or too independent. And so these aspects were relegated into the unconscious, where they gain tremendous psychological power precisely because they've been rejected, repressed, and denied. The shadow isn't evil or sick. It's simply the repository of everything we've learned to disown. For men raised in cultures that demand emotional stoicism, that equate vulnerability with weakness, that celebrate detachment as strength, the shadow becomes a vast repository of feeling, need, and relational capacity that remains locked away. When a man inhabits his shadow fully, when he integrates the parts of himself that feel dangerous or uncontrollable, something remarkable happens. He becomes paradoxically more secure in his own self-possession. He no longer needs external validation because he's made peace with all of himself, even the parts society said were wrong. This integration creates a presence that others can sense, a kind of gravitational field that draws people toward him. Women in particular often sense this quality and misinterpret it as indifference, when it's actually something far more profound. A man who has claimed his own wholeness. But here's where the tragedy enters, and where understanding becomes essential for your freedom. Many women encounter men who haven't integrated their shadow at all, men who are still running from their own darkness, and the woman mistakes his avoidance for integration, his flight from intimacy for enlightened detachment, his emotional numbness for spiritual transcendence. She sees what she wants to see because her own unconscious programming is desperate for a familiar pattern. What unfolds is a psychological dance where neither partner is conscious of the forces moving them. He's running from intimacy because closeness with another person threatens to expose his fragility, his need, his incompleteness. She's chasing him because his unavailability echoes the emotional blueprint laid down in her earliest relationship, the one with her father. And in this mutual unconsciousness, both are triggered, both are wounded, both are acting out scenarios written long before they met. When you look at the female psyche through a Jungian lens, you see that a woman's inner masculine, what Jung called the animus, becomes activated by certain external masculine qualities. The animus isn't just about attraction, it's about the part of her own consciousness that seeks assertion, independence, and decisive action. When she encounters a man who embodies these qualities in an exaggerated, detached way, Her animus becomes inflamed. She feels drawn to him, not because she necessarily wants to be with him, but because something in her wants to become him, to claim the power and autonomy he represents. This is where the confusion begins. She confuses animus projection with genuine love. She believes she wants him, when what she actually wants is to reclaim the disowned masculine aspects within herself. This is one of the most liberating insights you can receive, because it shifts the entire dynamic from being about him to being about you, from being about his worth to being about your own fragmented wholeness. The nervous system plays a crucial role in this magnetism, and understanding this can begin to dissolve its power over you. Your nervous system evolved for survival in environments where threats could appear at any moment, where danger required hypervigilance, where unpredictability was the norm. When you're in the presence of someone emotionally unavailable, someone whose behavior is unpredictable, someone whose approval remains uncertain, your nervous system activates in a state of heightened alertness. Stress hormones flood your body: cortisol, adrenaline, norepinephrine. Your heart races, your senses sharpen, your entire being becomes mobilized. For an instant, for many instants, you're flooded with intense sensation and biological activation. And here's the crucial reframing. Your body doesn't distinguish between fear and passion, between the stress of uncertainty and the excitement of connection. Both create similar neurochemical profiles. Both feel alive. When you've spent your life in calmer, more secure relational environments, or conversely, when you've been traumatized into seeking safety through familiar forms of chaos, this activated state can feel like the only proof that love is real, that passion is authentic, that connection matters. A woman raised in an environment where her father was consistently present, consistently warm, consistently attuned to her needs, develops a secure attachment style. She learns that love is safe, that masculine presence is reliable, that her worth is inherent and doesn't need to be earned through emotional contortions. When she encounters a caring man, a present man, a man who offers her security and steadiness, her nervous system recognizes it as resonance. She feels calm in his presence, safe in his regard, genuinely seen. This kind of love doesn't produce the neurochemical rush of uncertainty, but it produces something arguably more valuable: the deep relaxation that comes from knowing you're safe, from feeling fundamentally okay. Many women, however, were not raised in this security. Many grew up with fathers who were absent, critical, unpredictable, or overtly rejecting. For these women, a secure man doesn't activate the nervous system in the way they've learned to associate with love. He feels too easy, too available, too unchallenging. Something in her knows, without knowing it consciously, that this isn't the familiar pattern of love, and familiar patterns, no matter how painful, feel true. This is the deepest trap, and it requires tremendous courage to see it clearly. Your attraction to unavailable men might be your nervous system's way of trying to heal an old wound. Your body is attempting to solve a childhood equation, trying to win the approval of a distant parent figure through the proxy of an emotionally unavailable romantic partner. The logic of the unconscious goes something like this: if I can make this man love me, if I can penetrate his walls, if I can finally be enough to keep someone emotionally distant by my side, then retroactively I will have healed the original abandonment. This is called repetition compulsion, and it's one of the most powerful forces in human psychology. We don't just passively receive our patterns, we actively seek them out, arrange them, perform them again and again with different partners, hoping that this time the ending will be different, that this time we'll finally succeed. The shadow of sexuality enters here with particular intensity because a woman who hasn't integrated her own sexual desire, who was taught that sexuality is dangerous or shameful or only acceptable within narrow parameters, often projects her disowned sexuality onto the unavailable man. She believes he represents some wild, authentic, liberated expression of sexuality that she's forbidden herself. She becomes sexually aroused by the very unavailability that frustrates her emotionally. The sexual and emotional get tangled into an impossible knot, where she believes that if she surrenders sexually to this man, if she offers him access to her body, she might finally crack through his emotional armor and find the vulnerability beneath. She unconsciously believes that sexuality is the key that will unlock his heart, not recognizing that his emotional unavailability usually stems from the same place hers does. Disconnection from her own authentic self, fragmentation, unintegrated shadow material. This is where conscious sexuality becomes revolutionary, not in a trendy modern sense, but in a deeply Jungian sense. Conscious sexuality means knowing the difference between sexual desire that arises from your whole integrated self and sexual desire that arises from your fragmented, wounded, shadow-seeking self. When you're with a man trying to prove something, trying to earn love, trying to heal a wound through your body, your sexuality becomes servile, becomes a tool for someone else's healing, becomes disconnected from your own authentic pleasure and power. You use your sexuality to try to change him, to keep him, to finally be enough. This isn't consciousness. This is the most subtle form of unconsciousness dressed up as surrender. True conscious sexuality requires that you first become conscious of what you're actually seeking through sexual connection, that you understand your own body as a gateway to your own wholeness, rather than as a tool for winning approval. In Jungian terms, integration means bringing the shadow into consciousness, acknowledging it, accepting it, finding ways to express it that honor both your authenticity and your values. For women who have been raised to deny their sexuality, integration means exploring your own capacity for desire without shame, understanding that your sexuality is not a commodity to be traded for love, but an expression of your own life force, your own creative power, your own divine feminine essence. It means learning to differentiate between authentic desire that feels generative and nourishing, and compulsive desire that feels driven by fear and need. When you're drawn to an unavailable man, check in with your body. Does this attraction feel like expansion or contraction? Does it feel like you're becoming more yourself or less yourself? Does it generate excitement about your own life, or does it consume all your energy through focus on his? The ancestral patterns here deserve recognition because they're not personal failings. They're inheritable psychological templates that have been passed down through generations of women who learned survival strategies in times when a woman's security truly did depend on securing a high-status man's attention. Your great-grandmother's nervous system learned that male approval meant safety, meant survival, meant food and shelter and protection. This programming runs in your blood, in your neurobiology, in the deepest layers of your instinctual self. You're not weak or broken for feeling drawn to the emotionally detached man who might provide status or resources or a mysterious kind of power. You're experiencing the echoes of ancestral wisdom that was appropriate for a different world, a different survival context. What's required now isn't shame, but rather conscious choice. Not rejection of these instincts, but an integration that honors their origins while choosing differently in the present. What does integration actually look like in your daily life? It means when you feel that familiar pull towards someone emotionally distant, you pause, you breathe, you ask yourself, what is this feeling? Is this attraction to him or projection onto him? Is this genuine desire or repetition compulsion? Is this expansion of myself or contraction toward an ideal that was installed before I could choose? This pausing, this conscious interruption of the automatic response is where freedom begins. It doesn't mean you judge yourself for feeling drawn to him. It means you get curious about what part of you is doing the drawing. It means you imagine a conversation with the younger version of yourself who first learned that love looks like distance, and you offer her something different. The knowledge that love can also look like presence, like consistency, like being genuinely seen. Jung spoke extensively about the alchemical marriage, the union of opposites within the psyche that creates wholeness. This wasn't just metaphorical. He was describing a real psychological transformation where the conscious and unconscious become integrated, where the masculine and feminine aspects of self achieve balance, where light and shadow dance together in dynamic relationship rather than fighting for dominance. For a woman seeking the alchemical marriage externally, seeking a man who will complete her, rescue her, awaken her, she's actually seeking an external solution to an internal process. The man who seems unavailable might genuinely trigger something in her that feels like completion, but this is actually a moment when the internal alchemical marriage could be happening. The masculine principle within her calling to itself across the distance, seeking integration within her own psyche, misinterpreted as external romantic desire. The path through this, and it is a path, not a destination, requires developing what's sometimes called earned security. This means, regardless of what your early childhood established, you can consciously create new neural pathways, new nervous system responses, new patterns of relating by repeatedly experiencing different interactions, different kinds of love, different kinds of presence. It doesn't mean forcing yourself to fall in love with someone who doesn't activate you. It means allowing yourself to stay in connection with someone available long enough that your nervous system begins to recognize that safety can feel like love, that consistency can feel like passion, that being genuinely seen can feel like the deepest intimacy. This requires patience, requires tolerance of an unfamiliar feeling, requires resisting the urge to run back toward the familiar pattern of chase and distance. Many women report that when they finally allow themselves to develop a relationship with someone available and present, there's an initial period where they feel bored, where the relationship lacks the neurochemical intensity they've become addicted to, where they question whether they actually love him because it doesn't feel like the frantic energy they've learned to call love. This is the moment of greatest danger and greatest opportunity. This is the moment where the deeply unconscious is screaming that something is wrong because something is different, because something is finally right, and you don't have the reference point for rightness. In this moment, understanding becomes crucial. Your nervous system is being asked to recalibrate, to learn a new definition of love, to tolerate the anxiety of changing your fundamental relational template. Some women can do this. Some can sit with that discomfort, can continue choosing presence and consistency until their nervous system finally learns that this is safe, and gradually the calm begins to feel like the deepest peace rather than absence of passion. The conscious woman, the integrated woman, the woman who understands Jungian psychology and her own shadow, arrives at a place where she can appreciate the beauty in both types of men, the withdrawn and the present, the mysterious and the clear, without needing to be in romantic partnership with either. She can acknowledge the magnetic draw of the unavailable man, can understand the psychological mechanisms that create that draw, can appreciate the qualities in him that trigger her animus without needing to solve him or save him or make him love her. She can simultaneously appreciate the available man without dismissing him as boring or insufficient, because she understands that boring, from a nervous system perspective, means regulated, means safe, means finally able to relax into genuine presence. She's freed herself from the binary thinking that says there are only these two options: the exciting, unavailable man and the boring, available man. She opens herself to the radical possibility that genuine partnership can be both present and deep, both consistent and passionate, both psychologically healthy and erotically alive. This is where conscious sexuality and spiritual evolution truly intersect. When a woman has done the inner work to understand her patterns, to grieve what her father could not give her, to reclaim her wholeness, to integrate her shadow, including her sexual desire, she becomes capable of a sexuality that is neither servile nor defended against, but rather a full, authentic expression of her own life force. In this integrated state, her sexuality isn't about getting something from a man, it's about expressing something from within herself. She can be sexually alive with a man who is emotionally available because she's freed herself from the compulsion to use sex as a tool for connection. She can be emotionally open without needing to pay for it with sexual withholding. She can experience her own body as sacred and powerful and worthy of pleasure regardless of what any man thinks of her. The spiritual dimension becomes clear when you understand that the journey away from the unavailable man is not a journey toward settling for less. It's a journey toward claiming your own wholeness. Every time you choose presence over mystery, consistency over intensity, genuine intimacy over the fantasy of transformation, you're engaged in a spiritual practice. You're literally training your nervous system toward security. You're literally rewriting ancestral programming. You're literally choosing consciousness over unconsciousness. This is alchemy at its truest level, not as fantasy, but as daily practice, as the repeated small choices that gradually reshape your inner world and your capacity to love authentically. For men reading this, the wisdom applies inversely, but with equal power. Many men who seem emotionally unavailable are actually fragmented, are actually cut off from their own emotional capacities by the same forces that have been applied to women, just in different forms. The man who cannot commit, cannot be vulnerable, cannot let anyone close, is often protecting something precious inside, some wound so deep that closeness feels catastrophic. Understanding this in yourself, bringing consciousness to the patterns that keep you defended, becomes your own alchemical work. The woman who finally figures out that she needs to stop chasing you might also be offering you an unexpected gift, the mirror to see yourself clearly, the challenge to integrate your own shadow, the opportunity to become the kind of man who doesn't need to create distance to feel like he matters. The return to wholeness is always the return to yourself. Every spiritual path, every genuine psychological transformation, every real liberation points toward this central truth. You are already whole. You are not incomplete without another person. You do not need to be fixed by being chosen by someone emotionally distant. You do not need to be saved by transforming an unavailable man. You contain all the elements required for your own wholeness right now, in this moment, in this body, with this consciousness. The journey is not toward becoming someone else's dream, but toward becoming your own dream, toward building a life that activates your own creativity, your own sexuality, your own spiritual evolution, your own authentic expression. This is the true meaning of individuation in Jungian psychology, becoming fully yourself, not in rebellion against connection, but in genuine alignment with your deepest truth. And from this place of integrated wholeness, if you choose relationship, you won't be seeking it as completion, but as celebration, not as healing, but as expansion, not as salvation, but as joyful mutual exploration of two people who are already complete and choose to share their completeness. This is the promise, this is the possibility, this is the freedom that awaits when you finally understand the mechanisms that have been moving you and choose consciously to move yourself. But before we conclude this exploration, there's another dimension that requires your attention, a deeper layer that Jung himself spent decades investigating. The concept of the anima and animus as bridges to the divine. These aren't just psychological concepts. They're pathways to transcendence, gateways through which the infinite touches the finite. When you're caught in the chase of an unavailable man, you're not just replaying a family drama. You're potentially blocking access to your own spiritual expansion, the energy that could be flowing toward your own transformation. toward your own connection with something greater than yourself, becomes locked in a loop of seeking external validation from another human being. This is where many spiritual practitioners get stuck, and it's worth examining honestly. Are you using spirituality as another form of the same pattern, another way to seek transcendence through someone else's awakening rather than your own? There's a reason that many ancient wisdom traditions, from Tantra to Taoism, from Kabbalah to sacred sexuality, all point toward the same essential truth. The integration of masculine and feminine energies within yourself is the doorway to enlightenment. Not through rejection of sexuality, not through denying desire, but through conscious understanding of what desire actually is. Desire is energy, pure creative potential, the same force that moves the stars and grows the flowers. When this force is fragmented, when it's denied or repressed or projected outward, it becomes obsession, becomes addiction, becomes the compulsive chasing of unavailable partners. When it's integrated, when it's acknowledged and honored and channeled consciously, it becomes fuel for genuine spiritual evolution. This is not metaphorical. This is biological, psychological, and spiritual truth, converging into one unified understanding. The work of integration, then, becomes a daily practice, a moment-by-moment choice to bring consciousness to places where you've been operating on automatic. It means noticing the story you're telling yourself about the man who doesn't love you, the narrative you've constructed that makes his indifference seem like a challenge worth solving. It means getting curious about what that narrative costs you, the time, the energy, the creative potential, the spiritual growth that remains untapped while your focus is divided. It means considering the possibility that you've been paying for emotional crumbs with the currency of your wholeness, and that this transaction, once you see it clearly, becomes impossible to justify. And yet, there's compassion in this recognition, not judgment. You're not broken for having these patterns. Your nervous system isn't defective for responding to unavailability the way it does. You're simply demonstrating the remarkable adaptive capacity of the human psyche, the way it's learned to survive in a world where love felt conditional, distant, and difficult to obtain. Your patterns are wisdom in the wrong context. They were brilliant solutions to problems from your past. The gift now is recognizing that those problems no longer exist in your present, and you can choose different solutions. Consider this. What if the man who seems so unavailable, who triggers such powerful feelings in you, is actually serving as a mirror? What if his unavailability is reflecting back to you your own unavailability to yourself? What if every time you feel compelled to chase him, you're actually being called to pursue yourself with that same intensity, to court yourself with that same passion, to romance yourself with that same dedication? This inversion changes everything. Suddenly, the unavailable man isn't the problem, he's a teacher. His presence in your life, his effect on you, is an invitation to finally give yourself what you've been trying to get from him all along. This is radical self-love, and it's not the Instagram version of self-care and bubble baths. It's the kind of self-love that involves looking honestly at your shadows, your patterns, your unconscious programming, and choosing differently anyway. It's the kind of self-love that doesn't require anyone else's participation or approval. It's the kind of self-love that becomes unshakable because it's not dependent on external circumstances. This is the self-love that becomes the foundation for genuine spiritual growth, the ground from which authentic connection becomes possible. From this place of real self-love, real wholeness, real integration, if you choose to be in relationship with another person, it will be a choice, not a compulsion. It will be a celebration of two wholes coming together, not two halves desperately trying to complete each other. The journey doesn't end here. It spirals deeper and deeper into layers of understanding that become increasingly subtle and sophisticated. As you develop genuine security within yourself, you may find that your triggers shift. What once activated your nervous system might become merely interesting, observable from a distance, like watching clouds pass through the sky. You become the witness to your own patterns rather than being possessed by them. This witnessing itself is a spiritual practice, a form of meditation, a training in consciousness. In these moments of witnessing, freedom becomes tangible, becomes real, becomes something you can actually feel in your body. And that feeling, that taste of freedom, becomes the motivation for continuing the work, for going deeper, for choosing consciousness again and again, until it becomes your default rather than your exception. What becomes visible in this deepening work is that your patterns around unavailable men might also reveal something about your relationship with your own power. Women who are drawn to distant, detached men often possess tremendous strength within themselves that remains unexpressed, unacknowledged, underutilized. The unavailable man's emotional distance paradoxically gives permission to remain small, to stay in the background, to avoid the visibility that comes with claiming your own power. If you're busy trying to win his love, you're not stepping into your own authority. If you're focused on penetrating his walls, you're not building your own empire. The pattern serves a function. It keeps you occupied with someone else's transformation instead of your own. Breaking this pattern requires acknowledging that your power might actually frighten you more than his distance does. A woman who claims her full power, who knows her own worth, who doesn't need a man to validate her existence, who has integrated her sexuality and her spirituality into a coherent whole. This woman is formidable. She's no longer small enough to fit into someone else's limited capacity for love.